Section 1 of The Adventures of Reddy Fox. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Reddy Fox by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 1. Granny Fox Gives Reddy a Scare. Reddy Fox lived with Granny Fox. You see, Reddy was one of a large family, so large that Mother Fox had hard work to feed so many hungry little mouths, and so she had let Reddy go to live with old Granny Fox. Granny Fox was the wisest, slyest, smartest fox in all the country round, and now that Reddy had grown so big, she thought it about time that he began to learn the things that every fox should know. So every day she took him hunting with her and taught him all the things that she had learned about hunting, about how to steal Farmer Brown's chickens without awakening Bowser the Hound, and all about the 1,001 ways of fooling a dog that she had learned. This morning Granny Fox had taken Reddy across the Green Meadows, up through the Green Forest, and over to the railroad track. Reddy had never been there before, and he didn't know just what to make of it. Granny trotted ahead until they came to a long bridge. Then she stopped. "Come here, Reddy, and look down," she commanded. Reddy did as he was told, but a glance down made him giddy, so giddy that he nearly fell. Granny Fox grinned. "Come across," said she, and ran lightly across to the other side. But Reddy Fox was afraid. Yes, sir, he was afraid to take one step on the long bridge. He was afraid that he would fall through into the water or onto the cruel rocks below. Granny Fox ran back to where Reddy sat. "For shame, Reddy Fox," said she. "What are you afraid of? Just don't look down, and you will be safe enough. Now come along over with me." But Reddy Fox hung back and begged to go home and whimpered. Suddenly Granny Fox sprang to her feet as if in great fright. "Bowser the Hound! Come, Reddy, come!" she cried, and started across the bridge as fast as she could go. Reddy didn't stop to look or to think. His one idea was to get away from Bowser the Hound. "Wait, Granny, wait!" he cried, and started after her as fast as he could run. He was in the middle of the bridge before he remembered it at all. When he was at last safely across, it was to find old Granny Fox sitting down, laughing at him. Then for the first time Reddy looked behind him to see where Bowser the Hound might be. He was nowhere to be seen. Could he have fallen off the bridge? "Where is Bowser the Hound?" cried Reddy. "Home in Farmer Brown's dooryard," replied Granny Fox dryly. Reddy stared at her for a minute. Then he began to understand that Granny Fox had simply scared him into running across the bridge. Reddy felt very cheap indeed. "Now we'll run back again," said Granny Fox, and this time Reddy did. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Granny Shows Reddy a Trick. Every day Granny Fox led Reddy Fox over to the long railroad bridge and made him run back and forth across it until he had no fear of it whatever. At first it had made him dizzy, but now he could run across at the top of his speed and not mind it in the least. "I don't see what good it does to be able to run across a bridge. Anyone can do that," exclaimed Reddy one day. Granny Fox smiled. "Do you remember the first time you tried to do it?" she asked. Reddy hung his head. Of course he remembered that Granny had had to scare him into crossing that first time. Suddenly Granny Fox lifted her head. "Hark!" she exclaimed. Reddy pricked up his sharp, pointed ears. Way off back, in the direction from which they had come, they heard the baying of a dog. It wasn't the voice of Bowser the Hound, but of a younger dog. Granny listened for a few minutes. The voice of the dog grew louder as it drew nearer. "He certainly is following our track," said Granny Fox. Rocks below. Granny Fox ran back to where Reddy sat. "For shame, Reddy Fox," said she. "What are you afraid of? Just don't look down, and you will be safe enough. Now come along over with me." But Reddy Fox hung back and begged to go home and whimpered. Suddenly Granny Fox sprang to her feet as if in great fright. "Bowser the Hound! Come, Reddy, come!" she cried, and started across the bridge as fast as she could go. Reddy didn't stop to look or to think. His one idea was to get away from Bowser the Hound. "Wait, Granny, wait!" he cried, and started after her as fast as he could run. He was in the middle of the bridge before he remembered it at all. When he was at last safely across, it was to find old Granny Fox sitting down, laughing at him. Then for the first time Reddy looked behind him to see where Bowser the Hound might be. He was nowhere to be seen. Could he have fallen off the bridge? "Where is Bowser the Hound?" cried Reddy. "Home in Farmer Brown's dooryard," replied Granny Fox dryly. Reddy stared at her for a minute. Then he began to understand that Granny Fox had simply scared him into running across the bridge. Reddy felt very cheap indeed. "Now we'll run back again," said Granny Fox, and this time Reddy did. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Granny shows Reddy a trick. Every day Granny Fox led Reddy Fox over to the long railroad bridge and made him run back and forth across it until he had no fear of it whatever. At first it had made him dizzy, but now he could run across at the top of his speed and not mind it in the least. "I don't see what good it does to be able to run across a bridge. Anyone can do that," exclaimed Reddy one day. Granny Fox smiled. "Do you remember the first time you tried to do it?" she asked. Reddy hung his head. Of course he remembered that Granny had had to scare him into crossing that first time. Suddenly Granny Fox lifted her head. "Hark!" she exclaimed. Reddy pricked up his sharp, pointed ears. Way off back, in the direction from which they had come, they heard the baying of a dog. It wasn't the voice of Bowser the Hound, but of a younger dog. Granny listened for a few minutes. The voice of the dog grew louder as it drew nearer. "He certainly is following our track," said Granny Fox. "Now, Reddy, you run across the bridge and watch from the top of the little hill over there. Perhaps I can show you a trick that will teach you why I have made you learn to run across the bridge." Reddy trotted across the long bridge and up to the top of the hill as Section 2 of The Adventures of Reddy Fox. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Reddy Fox by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 6. Drummer the Woodpecker Drums in Vain. Once upon a time, before he had grown to think himself so very, very smart, Reddy Fox would never have thought of running without watching out in every direction. He would have seen that thing that looked like the barrel of a gun sticking out from behind the old tree toward which he was running, and he would have been very suspicious indeed. But now all Reddy could think of was what a splendid chance he had to show all the little meadow and forest people what a bold, smart fellow he was. So once more Reddy sat down and waited until Bowser the Hound was almost up to him. Just then Drummer the Woodpecker began to make a tremendous noise. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat-tat. Now everybody who heard that rat-a-tat-tat-tat knew that it was a danger signal. Drummer the Woodpecker never drums just that way for pleasure, But Reddy Fox paid no attention to it. He didn't notice it at all. You see, he was so full of the idea of his own smartness that he didn't have room for anything else.
"Stupid thing,"
said Drummer the Woodpecker to himself.
"I don't know what I'm trying to warn him for anyway. The Green Meadows and the Green Forest would be better off without him, a lot better off. Nobody likes him. He's a dreadful bully and is all the time trying to catch or scare to death those who are smaller than he. Still, he is so handsome."
Drummer cocked his head on one side and looked over at Reddy Fox. Reddy was laughing to see how hard Bowser the Hound was working to untangle Reddy's mixed-up trail.
"Yes, sir, he certainly is handsome,"
said Drummer once more. Then he looked down at the foot of the old tree on which he was sitting, and what he saw caused Drummer to make up his mind.
"I surely would miss seeing that beautiful red coat of his. I surely would," he muttered. "If he doesn't hear and heed now, it won't be my fault."
Then Drummer the Woodpecker began such a furious rat-a-tat-tat on the trunk of the old tree that it rang through the Green Forest and out across the Green Meadows almost to the Purple Hills. Down at the foot of the tree, a freckled face on which there was a black scowl looked up. It was the face of Farmer Brown's boy. "What ails that pesky woodpecker?" he muttered. "If he doesn't keep still, he'll scare that fox." He shook a fist at Drummer, but Drummer didn't appear to notice. He kept right on, rat-a-tat-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat-tat. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Too late, Reddy Fox hears. Drummer the Woodpecker was pounding out his danger signal so fast and so hard that his red head flew back and forth almost too fast to see. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat-a-tat-tat, beat Drummer on the old tree trunk on the edge of the Green Forest. When he stopped for breath, he looked down into the scowling face of Farmer Brown's boy, who was hiding behind the old tree trunk. Drummer didn't like the looks of that scowl, not a bit, and he didn't like the looks of the gun which Farmer Brown's boy had. He knew that Farmer Brown's boy was hiding there to shoot Reddy Fox. But Drummer was beginning to be afraid that Farmer Brown's boy might guess what all that drumming meant, that it was a warning to Reddy Fox. And if Farmer Brown's boy did guess that, anyway, on the other side of the tree there was a better place to drum. So Drummer the Woodpecker crept around to the other side of the tree and in a minute was drumming harder than ever. Whenever he stopped for breath, he looked out over the Green Meadows to see if Reddy Fox had heard his warning. But if Reddy had heard, he hadn't heeded. Just to show off before all the little meadow and forest people, Reddy had waited until Bowser the Hound had almost reached him. Then, with a saucy flirt of his tail, Reddy Fox started to show how fast he could run, and that is very fast indeed. It made Bowser the Hound seem very slow, as, with his nose to the ground, he came racing after Reddy, making a tremendous noise with his great voice. Now, Reddy Fox had grown as careless as he had grown bold. Instead of looking sharply ahead, he looked this way and that way to see who was watching and admiring him. So he took no note of where he was going and started straight for the old tree trunk on which Drummer the Woodpecker was pounding out his warning of danger. Now Reddy Fox has sharp eyes and very quick ears. My, indeed he has. But just now Reddy was as deaf as if he had cotton stuffed in his ears. He was chuckling to himself to think how he was going to fool Bowser the Hound and how smart everyone would think him, when all of a sudden he heard the rat-a-tat-tat-a-tat-tat of Drummer the Woodpecker and knew that that meant danger. For just a wee little second it seemed to Reddy Fox that his heart stopped beating. He couldn't stop running, for he had let Bowser the Hound get too close for that. Reddy's sharp eyes saw Drummer the Woodpecker near the top of the old tree trunk and noticed that Drummer seemed to be looking at something down below. Reddy Fox gave one quick look. Section 3 of The Adventures of Reddy Fox. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Reddy Fox by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 10. Poor Reddy Fox. Peter Rabbit and Johnny Chuck stole up the hill toward the home of Reddy Fox. As they drew near, they crept from one bunch of grass to another and from bush to bush, stopping behind each to look and listen. They were not taking any chances. Johnny Chuck was not much afraid of Reddy Fox, for he had whipped him once, but he was afraid of old Granny Fox. Peter Rabbit was afraid of both. The nearer he got to the home of Reddy Fox, the more anxious and nervous he grew. You see, Reddy Fox had played so many tricks to try and catch Peter that Peter was not quite sure that this was not another trick. So he kept a sharp watch in every direction, ready to run at the least sign of danger. When they had tiptoed and crawled to a point where they could see the doorstep of the Fox home, Peter Rabbit and Johnny Chuck lay down in a clump of bushes and watched. Pretty soon they saw old Granny Fox come out. She sniffed the wind, and then she started off at a quick run down the Lone Little Path. Johnny Chuck gave a sigh of relief, for he wasn't afraid of Reddy, and now he felt safe. But Peter Rabbit was just as watchful as ever.
"I've got to see Reddy for myself before I'll go a step nearer,"
he whispered. Just then Johnny Chuck put a hand on his lips and pointed with the other hand. There was Reddy Fox crawling out of his doorway into the sun. Peter Rabbit leaned forward to see better. Was Reddy Fox really so badly hurt, or was he only pretending? Reddy Fox crawled painfully out onto his doorstep. He tried to stand and walk, but he couldn't because he was too stiff and sore. So he just crawled. He didn't know that anyone was watching him, and with every movement he made a face. That was because it hurt so. Peter Rabbit, watching from the clump of bushes, knew then that Reddy was not pretending. He knew that he had nothing, not the least little thing to fear from Reddy Fox. So Peter gave a whoop of joy and sprang out into view. Reddy looked up and tried to grin, but made a face of pain instead. You see, it hurt so to move.
I suppose you're tickled to death to see me like this,
he growled to Peter Rabbit. Now, Peter had every reason to be glad, for Reddy Fox had tried his best to catch Peter Rabbit to give to old Granny Fox for her dinner, and time and again Peter had just barely escaped. So at first Peter Rabbit had whooped with joy. But as he saw how very helpless Reddy really was, and how much pain he felt, suddenly Peter Rabbit's big soft eyes filled with tears of pity. He forgot all about the threats of Reddy Fox and how Reddy had tried to trick him. He forgot all about how mean Reddy had been.
"Poor Reddy Fox,"
said Peter Rabbit.
"Poor Reddy Fox."
End of chapter 10. Chapter 11. Granny Fox returns. Up over the hill trotted old Granny Fox. She was on her way home with a tender young chicken for Reddy Fox. Poor Reddy! Of course it was his own fault, for he had been showing off and he had been careless, or he never would have gone so near to the old tree trunk behind which Farmer Brown's boy was hiding. But old Granny Fox didn't know this. She never makes such mistakes herself. Oh my, no! So now, as she came up over the hill to a place where she could see her home, she laid the chicken down, and then she crept behind a little bush and looked all over the Green Meadows to see if the way was clear. She knew that Bowser the Hound was chained up. She had seen Farmer Brown and Farmer Brown's boy hoeing in the cornfield, so she had nothing to fear from them. Looking over to her doorstep, she saw Reddy Fox lying in the sun, and then she saw something else. Something that made her eyes flash and her teeth come together with a snap. It was Peter Rabbit sitting up very straight, not 10 feet from Reddy Fox.
So that's that young scamp of a Peter Rabbit whom Reddy was going to catch for me when I was sick and couldn't. Well, I'll just show Reddy Fox how easily it can be done, and he shall have tender young rabbit with his chicken," said Granny Fox to herself.
So first she studied and studied every clump of grass and every bush behind which she could creep. She saw that she could get almost to where Peter Rabbit was sitting and never once show herself to him. Then she looked this way and looked that way to make sure that no one was watching her. No one did she see on the Green Meadows who was looking her way. Then Granny Fox began to crawl from one clump of grass to another and from bush to bush. Sometimes she wriggled along flat on her stomach. Little by little she was drawing nearer and nearer to Peter Rabbit. Now, with all her smartness, Granny Fox had forgotten one thing. Yes, Sir, she had forgotten one thing. Never once had she thought to look up in the sky, and there was Ol' Mistah Buzzard sailing round and looking down and seeing all that was going on below. Ol' Mistah Buzzard is sharp. He knew just what old Granny Fox was planning to do, knew it as well as if he had read her thoughts. His eyes twinkled.
"I certainly can't allow little Brer Rabbit to be hurt. I certainly can't,"
muttered Ol' Mistah Buzzard and chuckled. Then he slanted his broad wings downward and without a sound slid down out of the sky till he was right behind Granny Fox.
"Do yo' always crawl home, Granny Fox?"
asked Ol' Mistah Buzzard. Granny Fox was so startled, for she hadn't heard a sound, that she jumped almost out of her skin. Of course, Peter Rabbit saw her then and was off like a shot. Granny Fox showed all her teeth. "I wish you would mind your own business, Mr. Buzzard," she snarled.
"Certainly, certainly, I surely will,"
replied Ol' Mistah Buzzard, and sailed up into the blue, blue sky. Chapter 12. The Lost Chicken. When old Granny Fox had laid down the chicken she was bringing home to Reddy Fox to try to catch Peter Rabbit, she had meant to go right back and get it. Section 4 of The Adventures of Reddy Fox. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Reddy Fox by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 14. Granny Fox Finds What Became of the Chicken. Old Granny Fox was in a terrible temper. Dear, dear, it certainly was a dreadful temper. Jimmy Skunk laughed at her, and that made it worse. When he saw this, Jimmy Skunk just rolled over and over on the ground and shouted, he was so tickled. Of course, it wasn't the least bit nice of Jimmy Skunk, but you know that Granny Fox had been calling Jimmy a thief. Then Jimmy doesn't like Granny Fox anyway, nor do any of the other little meadow and forest people, for most of them are very much afraid of her. When old Granny Fox finally got out of the bramble bush, she didn't stop to say anything more to Jimmy Skunk, but hurried away, muttering and grumbling and grinding her teeth. Old Granny Fox wasn't pleasant to meet just then, and when Bobby Coon saw her coming, he just thought it best to get out of her way, so he climbed a tree. It wasn't that Bobby Coon was afraid of old Granny Fox, bless you, no. Bobby Coon isn't a bit afraid of her. It was because he had a full stomach and was feeling too good-natured and lazy to quarrel.
"Good morning, Granny Fox. I hope you are feeling well this morning,"
said Bobby Coon as old Granny Fox came trotting under the tree he was sitting in. Granny Fox looked up and glared at him with yellow eyes. "It isn't a good morning, and I'm not feeling fine," she snapped.
"My goodness, how you have torn your skirts!"
exclaimed Bobby Coon. Old Granny Fox started to say something unpleasant. Then she changed her mind, and instead she sat down and told Bobby Coon all her troubles. As she talked, Bobby Coon kept ducking his head behind a branch of the tree to hide a smile. Finally Granny Fox noticed it. "What do you keep ducking your head for, Bobby Coon?" she asked suspiciously.
"I'm just looking to see if I can see any feathers from that chicken,"
replied Bobby Coon gravely, though his eyes were twinkling with mischief.
"Well, do you?"
demanded old Granny Fox. And just then Bobby Coon did. They were not on the ground, however, but floating in the air. Bobby Coon leaned out to see where they came from, and Granny Fox turned to look too. What do you think they saw? Why, sitting on a tall dead tree was Mr. Goshawk, just then swallowing the last of Granny's chicken. "Thief! Thief! Robber! Robber!" shrieked old Granny Fox. But Mr. Goshawk said nothing, just winked at Bobby Coon, puffed out his feathers, and settled himself for a comfortable nap. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. Reddy Fox has a visitor. Hardly was old Granny Fox out of sight on her way to hunt for the chicken she had left on the hill when Unc' Billy Possum came strolling along the Lone Little Path. He was humming to himself, for he had just had a good breakfast. One of the Merry Little Breezes spied him and hurried to meet him and tell him about how Reddy Fox had been shot. Unc' Billy listened, and the grin with which he greeted the Merry Little Breeze grew into a broad smile. "Are you all sure about that?" he asked. The Merry Little Breeze was sure. Unc' Billy Possum stopped for a few minutes and considered. "Serves that no-count Reddy Fox right," chuckled Unc' Billy. "He done spoiled my hunting at Farmer Brown's. He raised such a fuss among the hens up there. 'Tisn't safe to go up there any more. No, Sah, 'tisn't safe, and it won't be safe for a right smart while. Did you say that Granny Fox is home?" The Merry Little Breeze hadn't said anything about Granny Fox, but now remembered that she had gone up the hill. "I believe I will just tote my sympathy over to Reddy Fox," said Unc' Billy Possum, as he started in the direction of Reddy Fox's house. But he made sure that old Granny Fox was not at home before he showed himself. Reddy Fox lay on his doorstep. He was sick and sore and stiff. Indeed, he was so stiff he couldn't walk at all, and he was weak and hungry, dreadfully hungry. When he heard footsteps, he thought old Granny Fox was bringing him the chicken after which she had gone. He felt too ill even to turn his head. "Did you get the chicken, Granny?" he asked weakly. No one answered. "I say, did you get the chicken, Granny?" Reddy's voice sounded a little sharp and cross as he asked this time. Still there was no reply, and Reddy began to be a little bit suspicious. He turned over and raised his head to look. Instead of old Granny Fox, there was Unc' Billy Possum grinning at him. "Smarty, Smarty is a thief. Smarty, Smarty came to grief. Tried to show off just for fun and ran too near a loaded gun. Yo' certainly has got just what you deserve, and I'm glad of it. I'm glad of it, sah," said Unc' Billy Possum severely. An angry light came into the eyes of Reddy Fox and made them an ugly yellow for just a minute, but he felt too sick to quarrel. Unc' Billy Possum saw this. He saw how Reddy was really suffering, and down deep in his heart Unc' Billy was truly sorry for him. But he didn't let Reddy know it. No, indeed. He just pretended to be tickled to death to see Reddy Fox so helpless. He didn't dare stay long for fear Granny Fox would return. So after saying a few more things to make Reddy feel uncomfortable, Unc' Billy started off up the Lone Little Path toward the Green Forest. "Too bad, too bad," he muttered to himself. "If old Granny Fox isn't smart enough to get Reddy enough to eat, I'll have to see what we alls can do. I certainly will." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Unc' Billy Possum visits the Smiling Pool. Joe Otter and Billy Mink were sitting on the big rock in the Smiling Pool. Because they had nothing else to do, they were planning mischief. Jerry Muskrat was busy filling his new house with food for the winter. He was too busy to get into mischief. Suddenly Billy Mink put a finger on his lips as a warning to Little Joe Otter to keep perfectly still. Billy's sharp eyes had seen something moving over in the bulrushes. Together he and Little Joe Otter watched, ready to dive into the Smiling Pool at the first sign of danger. In a few minutes the rushes parted and a sharp little old face peered out. Little Joe Otter and Billy Mink each sighed with relief, and their eyes began to dance.
"Hi, Unc' Billy Possum!"
shouted Billy Mink. A grin crept over the sharp little old face peering out from the bulrushes. "Hi yourself!" he shouted, for it really was Unc' Billy Possum.
"What are you doing over here?"
called Little Joe Otter.
"Just looking around,"
replied Unc' Billy Possum, his eyes twinkling.
"Have you heard about Reddy Fox?"
shouted Billy Mink.
"I done just come from his home,"
replied Unc' Billy Possum.
"How is he?"
asked Little Joe Otter.
"Po'ly. He surely is po'ly,"
replied Unc' Billy Possum, shaking his head soberly. Then Unc' Billy told Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter how Reddy Fox was so stiff and sore and sick that he couldn't get anything to eat for himself, and how old Granny Fox had lost a chicken which she had caught for him.
"Serves him right!"
exclaimed Billy Mink, who has never forgotten how Reddy Fox fooled him and caught the most fish once upon a time. Unc' Billy nodded his head.
"Yo' all right. Yo' cert'nly all right. Yes, Sah, I reckons yo' all right."
"Was you ever hungry, Billy Mink?"
"Real hungry?"
asked Unc' Billy Possum. Billy Mink thought of the time when he went without his dinner because Mr. Night Heron had gobbled it up, when Billy had left it in a temper. He nodded his head.
"I was just a-wondering,"
continued Unc' Billy Possum,
"how it would seem to be right smart, powerful hungry, and not be able to hunt for anything to eat."
For a few minutes no one said a word. Then Billy Mink stood up and stretched.
"Goodbye,"
said Billy Mink.
"Where are you going so suddenly?"
demanded Little Joe Otter.
"I'm going to catch a fish and take it to Reddy Fox, if you must know,"
snapped Billy Mink.
"Good!"
cried Little Joe Otter.
"You needn't think that you can have all the fun to yourself, Billy Mink. I'm going with you."
There was a splash in the Smiling Pool, and Unc' Billy Possum was left looking out on nothing but the Smiling Pool and the Big Rock. He smiled to himself as he turned away.
"I reckon I'll sure have to do my share too,"
said he. And so it happened that when old Granny Fox finally reached home with nothing but a little wood mouse for Reddy, she found him taking a nap, his stomach as full as it could be. And just a little way off were two fish tails and the feathers of a little duck. Section 5 of The Adventures of Reddy Fox. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Reddy Fox by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 19. Unc' Billy Possum Gives Warning.
"What's the matter with you, Unc' Billy? You look as if you had lost your last friend."
It was Jimmy Skunk who spoke. Unc' Billy Possum stopped short. He had been hurrying so fast that he hadn't seen Jimmy Skunk at all. "Matter enough, sah, matter enough," said Unc' Billy Possum, when he could get his breath. "Do you hear that noise?"
"Sure I hear that noise. That's only Bowser the Hound chasing old Granny Fox. When she gets tired, she'll lose him," replied Jimmy Skunk. "What are you worrying about Bowser the Hound for?"
"Bowser the Hound will have to be smarter than he is now before he can worry me, I reckon," said Unc' Billy Possum scornfully. "It isn't Bowser the Hound, it's Farmer Brown's boy and his gun." Then Unc' Billy told Jimmy Skunk how he had been hiding in the woodpile at Farmer Brown's and had heard Farmer Brown's boy say that he was going to hunt over the Green Meadows and through the Green Forest until he got Reddy Fox.
"What of it?" asked Jimmy Skunk. "If he gets Reddy Fox, so much the better. Reddy always did make trouble for other people. I don't see what you're worrying about Reddy Fox for. He's big enough to take care of himself."
"Yo' certainly are plumb slow in your wits this morning, Jimmy Skunk. Yo' certainly are plumb slow. Supposin' yo' should meet up with Farmer Brown's boy with that gun in his hands, and supposin' he had grown tired of watching for Reddy Fox. That gun might go off, Jimmy Skunk. It might go off when it was pointing right straight at you," said Unc' Billy Possum. Jimmy Skunk looked serious.
"That's so, Unc' Billy, that's so," he said. "Boys with guns do get dreadfully careless, dreadfully careless. They don't seem to think anything about the feelings of those likely to get hurt when the gun goes off. What was you thinking of doing, Unc' Billy?" "Just passing the word along so everybody in the Green Meadows and in the Green Forest will keep out of the way of Farmer Brown's boy," replied Unc' Billy Possum. "Good idea, Unc' Billy. I'll help you," said Jimmy Skunk. So Unc' Billy Possum went one way, and Jimmy Skunk went another way, and everyone they told hurried to tell some one else. Happy Jack Squirrel told Chatterer the Red Squirrel, Chatterer told Striped Chipmunk, and Striped Chipmunk told Danny Meadow Mouse. Danny Meadow Mouse told Johnny Chuck. Johnny Chuck told Peter Rabbit. Peter Rabbit told Jumper the Hare. Jumper the Hare told Prickly Porky. Prickly Porky told Bobby Coon. Bobby Coon told Billy Mink. Billy Mink told Little Joe Otter. Little Joe Otter told Jerry Muskrat, and Jerry Muskrat told Grandfather Frog. And everybody hastened to hide from Farmer Brown's boy and his terrible gun. By and by Farmer Brown's boy noticed how still it was in the Green Forest. Nowhere did he see or hear a bird. Nowhere could he catch a glimpse of anybody who wore fur. "That fox must have scared away all the other animals and driven away all the birds. I'll get him. See if I don't," muttered Farmer Brown's boy, and never once guessed that they were hiding from him. Chapter 20. Old Granny Fox Makes a Mistake. Old Granny Fox was running through the overgrown old pasture way up back of Farmer Brown's. She was cross and tired and hot, for it was a very warm day. Behind her came Bowser the Hound, his nose in Granny's tracks, and making a great noise with his big voice. Granny Fox was cross because she was tired. She hadn't done much running lately, and she didn't mind running when the weather was cold, but now—
"Oh dear, it is hot,"
sighed old Granny Fox as she stopped a minute to rest. Now, old Granny Fox is very, very smart and very, very wise. She knows all the tricks with which foxes fool those who try to catch them. She knew that she could fool Bowser the Hound and puzzle him so that he wouldn't be able to follow her track at all. But she wasn't ready to do that yet. No, indeed. Old Granny Fox was taking great care to see that her tracks were easy to follow. She wanted Bowser the Hound to follow them, although it made her tired and hot and cross. Why did she? Well, you see, she was trying to lead him, and with him Farmer Brown's boy, far, far away from the home where Reddy Fox was nursing the wounds that he had received when Farmer Brown's boy had shot at him a few days before.
"Bow wow wow!"
roared Bowser the Hound, following every twist and turn which Granny Fox made, just as she wanted him to. Back and forth across the old pasture and way up among the rocks on the edge of the mountain, Granny Fox led Bowser the Hound. It was a long, long, long way from the Green Meadows and the Green Forest. Granny Fox had made it a long way purposely. She was willing to be tired herself if she could also tire Bowser the Hound and Farmer Brown's boy. She wanted to tire them so that when she finally puzzled and fooled them and left them there, they would be too tired to go back to the Green Meadows. By and by Granny Fox came to a hole in the ground, an old house that had once belonged to her grandfather. Now this old house had a back door hidden close beside the hollow trunk of a fallen tree. Old Granny Fox just ran through the house, out the back door, through the hollow tree, and then jumped into a little brook where there was hardly more than enough water to wet her feet. Walking in the water, she left no scent in her tracks. Bowser the Hound came roaring up to the front door of the old house. Granny's tracks led right inside, and Bowser grew so excited that he made a tremendous noise. At last he had found where Granny Fox lived. At least, he thought he had. He was sure that she was inside, for there were her fresh tracks going inside and none coming out. Bowser the Hound never once thought of looking for a back door. If he had, he wouldn't have been any the wiser, because, old Granny Fox had slipped away through the hollow tree trunk. Granny Fox grinned as she listened to the terrible fuss Bowser was making. Then, when she had rested a little, she stole up on the hill where she could look down and see the entrance to the old deserted house. She watched Bowser digging and barking. After a while, a worried look crept into the face of old Granny Fox.
Where's Farmer Brown's boy? I thought surely he would follow Bowser the Hound,
she muttered. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Reddy Fox Disobeys. When old Granny Fox had sent Reddy Fox into the house and told him to stay there until she returned home, he had not wanted to mind. But he knew that Granny Fox meant just what she said, and so he had crawled slowly down the long hall to the bedroom way underground. Pretty soon Reddy Fox heard a voice. It was very faint, for Reddy was in his bedroom way underground, but he knew it. He pricked up his ears and listened. It was the voice of Bowser the Hound, and Reddy knew by the sound that Bowser was chasing Granny Fox. Reddy grinned. He wasn't at all worried about Granny Fox, not the least little bit. He knew how smart she was and that whenever she wanted to, she could get rid of Bowser the Hound. Then a sudden thought popped into Reddy's head, and he grew sober. "Granny did feel trouble coming, just as she said," he thought. Then Reddy Fox curled himself up and tried to sleep. He intended to mind and not put his little black nose outside until old Granny Fox returned. But somehow Reddy couldn't get to sleep. His bedroom was small, and he was so stiff and sore that he could not get comfortable. He twisted and turned and fidgeted. The more he fidgeted, the more uncomfortable he grew. He thought of the warm sunshine outside and how comfortable he would be stretched out full length on the doorstep. It would take the soreness out of his legs. Something must have happened to Granny to keep her so long. If she had known that she was going to be gone such a long time, she wouldn't have told him to stay until she came back, thought Reddy. By and by Reddy Fox crept a little way up the long, dark hall. He could just see the sunlight on the doorstep. Pretty soon he went a little bit nearer. He wasn't going to disobey old Granny Fox. Oh, no, no, indeed. She had told him to stay in the house until she returned. She hadn't said that he couldn't look out. Reddy crawled a little nearer to the open door and the sunlight.
Granny Fox is getting old and timid, just as if my eyes aren't as sharp as hers. I'd like to see Farmer Brown's boy get near me when I am really on the watch,"
said Reddy Fox to himself, and then he crept a little nearer to the open door. How bright and warm and pleasant it did look outside! Reddy just knew that he would feel ever and ever so much better if he could stretch out on the doorstep. He could hear Jenny Wren fussing and scolding at someone or something, and he wondered what it could be. He crept just a wee bit nearer. He could hear Bowser's voice, but it was so faint that he had to prick up his sharp little ears and listen with all his might to hear it at all.
"Granny's led them way off on the mountain. Good old Granny,"
thought Reddy Fox. Then he crawled right up to the very doorway. He could still hear Jenny Wren scolding and fussing.
"What does ail her? If it's hot or if it's cold, Jenny Wren will always scold. From morn till night, the whole day long, her limber tongue is going strong. I'm going to find out what it means,"
said Reddy, talking to himself. Reddy Fox poked his head out and looked straight into the freckled face of Farmer Brown's boy and the muzzle of that dreadful gun. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22. Ol' Mistah Buzzard's Keen Sight. Old Granny Fox had thought that when she fooled Bowser the Hound up in the old pasture on the edge of the mountain, she could take her time going home. She was tired and hot, and she had planned to pick out the shadiest paths going back. She had thought that Farmer Brown's boy would soon join Bowser the Hound when Bowser made such a fuss about having found the old house into which Granny Fox had run. But Farmer Brown's boy had not yet appeared, and Granny Fox was getting worried. Could it be that he had not followed Bowser the Hound after all? Granny Fox went out on a high point and looked, but she could see nothing of Farmer Brown's boy and his gun. Just then Ol' Mistah Buzzard came sailing down out of the blue, blue sky and settled himself on a tall, dead tree. Now Granny Fox hadn't forgotten how Ol' Mistah Buzzard had warned Peter Rabbit just as she was about to pounce on him, but she suddenly thought that Ol' Mistah Buzzard might be of use to her. So old Granny Fox smoothed out her skirts and walked over to the foot of the tree where Ol' Mistah Buzzard sat.
"How do you do today, neighbor Buzzard?"
inquired Granny Fox, smiling up at Ol' Mistah Buzzard.
"I'm so as to be up and about, thank you,"
replied Ol' Mistah Buzzard, spreading his wings out so that air could blow under them.
"My!"
exclaimed old Granny Fox.
"What splendid great wings you have, Mistah Buzzard! It must be grand to be able to fly. I suppose you can see a great deal from way up there in the blue, blue sky, Mr. Buzzard."
Ol' Mistah Buzzard felt flattered.
"Yes,"
said he.
"I can see all that's going on the Green Meadows and in the Green Forest."
"Oh, Mr. Buzzard, you don't really mean that!" exclaimed old Granny Fox, just as if she wanted to believe it but couldn't.
"Yes, I can,"
replied old Mr. Buzzard.
"Really, Mr. Buzzard? Really? Oh, I can't believe that your eyes are so sharp as all that. Now I know where Bowser the Hound is and where Farmer Brown's boy is, but I don't believe you can see them,"
said Granny Fox. Old Mr. Buzzard never said a word, but spread his broad wings, and in a few minutes he had sailed up, 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 until he looked just like a tiny speck to old Granny Fox. Now, old Granny Fox had not told the truth when she said she knew where Farmer Brown's boy was. She thought she would trick Ol' Mistah Buzzard into telling her. In a few minutes down came Ol' Mistah Buzzard.
"Bowser the Hound is up in the old back pasture,"
said he.
"Right!"
cried old Granny Fox, clapping her hands.
"And where is Farmer Brown's boy?" "Farmer Brown's boy is—"
Old Mistah Buzzard paused.
"Where? Where?"
asked Granny Fox so eagerly that old Mr. Buzzard looked at her sharply.
"You said you knew, so what's the use of telling you?"
said old Mr. Buzzard. Then he added,
"But if I was you, I certainly would get home right smart soon." "Why? Oh, do tell me what you saw, Mr. Buzzard,"
begged Granny Fox. But old Mr. Buzzard wouldn't say another word, so old Granny Fox started for home as fast as she could run.
"Oh dear, I do hope Reddy Fox minded me and stayed in the house," she muttered.
End of chapter 22 and end of section 5. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois. Section 6 of The Adventures of Reddy Fox. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader and
Aaron Walden doing the Merry Little Breezes.
The Adventures of Reddy Fox by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 23. Granny Fox Has a Terrible Scare. Old Granny Fox felt her heart sink way down to her toes, for she felt sure old Mistah Buzzard had seen Farmer Brown's boy and his gun over near the house where Reddy Fox was nursing his wounds, or he wouldn't have advised her to hurry home. She was already very tired and hot from the long run to lead Bowser the Hound away from the Green Meadows. She had thought to walk home along shady paths and cool off, but now she must run faster than ever, for she must know if Farmer Brown's boy had found her house.
"It's lucky I told Reddy Fox to go inside and not come out till I returned. It's very lucky I did that,"
thought Granny Fox as she ran. Presently she heard voices singing. They seemed to be in the tree tops over her head.
Happily we dance and play all the live one sunny day. Happily we run and race and win or lose with smiling face.
Granny Fox knew the voices, and she looked up. Just as she expected, she saw the Merry Little Breezes of Old Mother West Wind playing among the leaves. Just then one of them looked down and saw her.
There's old Granny Fox. Just see how hot and tired she looks. Let's go down and cool her off,
shouted the Merry Little Breeze. In a flash they were all down out of the tree tops and dancing around old Granny Fox, cooling her off. Of course, Granny Fox kept right on running. She was too worried not to. But the Merry Little Breezes kept right beside her, and it was not nearly as hard running now as it had been. "Have you seen Farmer Brown's boy?" patted Granny Fox.
Oh yes, we saw him just a little while ago over near your house. Granny Fox, we pulled his hat off just to hear him scold,
shouted the Merry Little Breezes, and then they tickled and laughed as if they had had a good time with Farmer Brown's boy. But old Granny Fox didn't laugh. Oh my, no indeed. Her heart went lower still, and she did her best to run faster. Pretty soon she came out on the top of the hill where she could look, and then it seemed as if her heart came right up in her mouth and stopped beating. Her eyes popped almost out of her head. There was Farmer Brown's boy standing right in front of the door of her home. And while she was watching, what should Reddy Fox do but stick his head out the door? Old Granny Fox saw the gun of Farmer Brown's boy pointed right at Reddy, and she clapped both hands over her eyes to shut out the dreadful sight. Then she waited for the bang of the gun. It didn't come. Then Granny peeped through her fingers. Farmer Brown's boy was still there, but Reddy Fox had disappeared inside the house. Granny Fox sighed in relief. It had been a terrible scare, the worst she could remember. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24. Granny and Reddy Have to Move.
"I don't want to move,"
whined Reddy Fox.
"I'm too sore to walk."
Old Granny Fox gave him a shove.
"You go along and do as I say,"
she snapped.
"If you had minded me, we wouldn't have to move. It's all your own fault. The wonder is that you weren't killed when you poked your head out right in front of Farmer Brown's boy. Now that he knows where we live, he will give us no peace. Move along lively now. This is the best home I have ever had, and now I've got to leave it. Oh dear, oh dear."
Reddy Fox hobbled along up the long hall and out the front door. He was walking on 3 legs, and at every step he made a face because, you know, it hurts so to walk. The little stars, looking down from the sky, saw Reddy Fox limp out the door of the house he had lived in so long, and right behind him came old Granny Fox. Granny sighed and wiped away a tear as she said good-bye to her old home. Reddy Fox was thinking too much of his own troubles to notice how badly Granny Fox was feeling. Every few steps he had to sit down and rest because it hurt him so to walk.
"I don't see the use of moving tonight anyway. It would be a lot easier and pleasanter when the sun is shining. This night air makes me so stiff that I know I never will get over it,"
grumbled Reddy Fox. Old Granny Fox listened to him for a while, and then she lost patience. Yes, sir, Granny Fox lost patience. She boxed Reddy Fox first on one ear and then on the other. Reddy began to snivel.
"Stop it!" said Granny Fox sharply. "Do you want all the neighbors to know that we have got to move? They'll find it out soon enough. Now come along without any more fuss. If you don't, I'll just go off and leave you to shift for yourself. Then how will you get anything to eat?"
Reddy Fox wiped his eyes on his coat sleeve and hobbled along as best he could. Granny Fox would run a little way ahead to see that the way was safe and then come back for Reddy. Oh, poor Reddy. He did his best not to complain, but it was such hard work, and somehow Reddy Fox didn't believe that it was at all necessary. He had been terribly frightened when he had disobeyed Granny Fox that afternoon and put his head out the door, only to look right into the freckled face of Farmer Brown's boy. He had ducked back out of sight again too quickly for Farmer Brown's boy to shoot, and now he couldn't see why old Granny Fox wanted to move that very night. "She's getting old. She's getting old and timid and fussy," muttered Reddy Fox as he hobbled along behind her. It seemed to Reddy as if they had walked miles and miles. He really thought that they had been walking nearly all night when old Granny Fox stopped in front of the worst-looking old fox house Reddy had ever seen.
"Here we are,"
said she.
What? Are we going to live in that thing?
cried Reddy.
It isn't fit for any respectable fox to put his nose into.
"It is where I was born,"
snapped old Granny Fox.
"If you want to keep out of harm's way, don't go to putting on airs now. Who scorns the simple things of life and tilts his nose at all he sees is almost sure to feel the knife of want cut through his pleasant ease. Now don't let me hear another word from you, but get inside at once."
Reddy Fox didn't quite understand all Granny Fox said, but he knew when she was to be obeyed, and so he crawled gingerly through the broken-down doorway. End of Chapter 24. Chapter 25. Peter Rabbit Makes a Discovery. Hardly had jolly, round, red Mr. Sun thrown off his nightcap and come out from his home behind the Purple Hills for his daily climb up in the blue, blue sky, when Farmer Brown's boy started down the Lone Little Path through the Green Forest. Peter Rabbit, who had been out all night and was just then on his way home, saw him. Peter stopped and sat up to rub his eyes and look again. He wasn't quite sure that he had seen aright the first time, but he had. There was Farmer Brown's boy, sure enough, and at his heels trotted Bowser the Hound. Peter Rabbit rubbed his eyes once more and wrinkled up his eyebrows. Farmer Brown's boy certainly had a gun over one shoulder and a spade over the other. Where could he be going down the Lone Little Path with a spade? Farmer Brown's garden certainly was not in that direction. Peter watched him out of sight, and then he hurried down to the Green Meadows to tell Johnny Chuck what he had seen. My, how Peter's long legs did fly! He was so excited that he had forgotten how sleepy he had felt a few minutes before. Halfway down to Johnny Chuck's house, Peter Rabbit almost ran plump into Bobby Coon and Jimmy Skunk, who had been quarreling and were calling each other names. They stopped when they saw Peter Rabbit.
"Peter Rabbit runs away from his shadow, so they say. Peter, Peter, what a sight! Tell us why this sudden fright?"
shouted Bobby Coon. Peter Rabbit stopped short. Indeed, he stopped so short that he almost turned a somersault.
Say,
he panted,
I've just seen Farmer Brown's boy.
You don't say so,
said Jimmy Skunk, pretending to be very much surprised.
You don't say so. Why, now I think of it, I believe I've seen Farmer Brown's boy a few times myself.
Peter Rabbit made a good-natured face at Jimmy Skunk, and then he told all about how he had seen Farmer Brown's boy with a gun and spade, and Bowser the Hound going down the Lone Little Path.
You know there isn't any garden down that way,
he concluded. Bobby Coon's face wore a sober look. Yes, sir, all the fun was gone from Bobby Coon's face.
"What's the matter?"
asked Jimmy Skunk.
"I was just thinking that Reddy Fox lives over in that direction, and he is so stiff that he cannot run,"
replied Bobby Coon. Jimmy Skunk hitched up his trousers and started toward the Lone Little Path.
"Come on," said he. "Let's follow him and see what he is about."
Bobby Coon followed at once, but Peter Rabbit said he would hurry over and get Johnny Chuck and then join the others. All this time Farmer Brown's boy had been hurrying down the Lone Little Path to the home old Granny Fox and Reddy Fox had moved out of the night before. Of course, he didn't know that they had moved. He put down his gun, and by the time Jimmy Skunk and Bobby Coon and Peter Rabbit and Johnny Chuck reached a place where they could peep out and see what was going on, he had dug a great hole.
Oh!" cried Peter Rabbit. "He's digging into the house of Reddy Fox, and he'll catch poor Reddy."
End of chapter 25. Chapter 26. Farmer Brown's boy works for nothing. The grass around the doorstep of the house where Reddy Fox had always lived was all wet with dew when Farmer Brown's boy laid his gun down, took off his coat, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and picked up his spade. It was cool and beautiful there on the edge of the Green Meadows. Jolly, round, red Mr. Sun had just begun his long climb up in the blue sky. Mr. Redwing was singing for joy over in the bulrushes on the edge of the Smiling Pool. Yes, it was very beautiful indeed. It didn't seem as if harm could come to any one on such a beautiful morning. But there was Farmer Brown's boy. He had crawled on his hands and knees without making a sound to get near enough to the home of Reddy Fox to shoot if Reddy was outside. But there was no sign of Reddy, so Farmer Brown's boy had hopped up, and now he was whistling as he began to dig. His freckled face looked good-natured. It didn't seem as if he could mean harm to any one. But there lay the gun, and he was working as if he meant to get to the very bottom of Reddy Fox's home. Deeper and deeper grew the hole, and bigger grew the pile of sand which he threw out. He didn't know that any one was watching him except Bowser the Hound. He didn't see